Is it working now? Hello. Let's get your feedback. Hello.
Hello. Hello.
What? Feedback.
Good afternoon, and welcome to The Future of Magazines, Part 3. This is actually the sequel to 2 panels from Readercon in 2009, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But I'd like to start with our panelists introducing themselves, and I will briefly mention we have a special guest. We have Sheila Williams, editor of Asimov's magazine, and we can start with her and work our way down.
Well, you just said everything I was going to say. I'm Sheila Williams, and I'm the editor of Asimov's science fiction magazine, which it comes out both in print and digital. We have both subscriptions.
I wasn't here for the earlier one, so I'm just guessing what kind of discussion was. But I was fiction editor. I've been fiction editor of print magazines, moving to online from Omni, which started print, ended up online. Event Horizon, which is totally online. Science Fiction, which is totally online. And now Tour.com, which is online, but does individual ebooks of each story. So I've gone through the whole evolution of an audio. But I don't know if the original conversation was.
That's okay. I'm Scott H. Andrews. I'm the editor-in-chief and publisher of Beneath the Sea Still Sky, which is an online fantasy magazine of secondary world fantasy. We publish online and as ebooks and as audio podcasts and annual best of ebook anthologies. And I think that's pretty much the same thing as what I was doing 6 years ago. So in that respect, I think a lot of that's the same.
All right, my name is Leah Bobet. I'm a writer, editor, and bookseller, and working, I guess, it has been exclusively being online. I was a founding editor at Benson and for the past 10 years, I have worked with editors for speculative fiction. I've been publisher and editor-in-chief there for the past 6 years, since, end of 2008.
I'm Clarke. I'm publisher and editor of Clarke's World magazine and Forever magazine. Clarke's World was born at Readercon 9 years ago. Started as an online magazine, ended up including podcasts and now a print version. Forever is a purely digital magazine.
I'm John Benson. I'm editor and publisher of Not One of Us, which, as you can see, is a hard copy magazine. Probably the longest running magazine that no one's ever heard of, which takes a particular set of skills, being very good at choosing material but not being a good businessman. But in any case, I was on one of the original panels, and I've been doing my magazine in hard copy all along, although I'm a big fan of online magazines, and that caused some controversy when I was on the original panel of print magazine editors, where I was like the odd man out.
So to briefly pick up on that, the panels that we are being a sequel to were 2 of them. One was on print magazines, and it's back-to-back in the same room with one on online magazines, led by the same discussion moderator with a different set of panelists for each one. And I was an audience for both, and I think a major theme or a major tone to those 2 sets of panels, especially going back-to-back, was print, online, ne'er the twain shall meet. And that, I think, is perhaps something that we'll end up touching a bit on how things may be different now. So I'll briefly go through the description here. 6 years later, we return to this issue to discover what worked, what didn't, whether magazines are any better off, and what the near future might hold. So let's start with the downside of that, what didn't work. Any comments on things you remember your own experiences from 6 years ago, things that you did or that you saw in the field that do not seem to have worked? Let me start.
Well, we probably should start with someone with experience.
Experience, what hasn't worked?
I don't know. Things have more often worked than not worked. I think the ones that didn't work were the people who didn't adapt.
Right.
There was a very militant streak in most, not all, of the first panel, which was kind of funny because they were very anti-online, and now one of those editors has a digital subscriptions with Amazon, and the other one, his print magazine closed, and now he has an online magazine. So what didn't work was the approaches at the time, but they eventually adapted and sort of got.
Right. And one of those moments in that print magazine panel was one of those editors talking about paper subscriptions being at a great state or situation or amount for them at that time. And of course, a year later, that situation completely changed. So I felt in that result a comment that purely paper subscriptions were not going to maintain. Our special guest.
It's an interesting thing because we launched digital subscriptions in November 2008. I think the first issue was in November 2008, which I'm not sure with Amazon. So I wasn't at the 2009 Readercon, but so I wasn't on either of those panels. But we were the 11th through 14th magazines to go up on Amazon because we put 4 official magazines up at the same time. So we had incredible product posted at Amazon. The homepage for the magazine page on Kindle for the first year and a half had a little fiction section of our 4 magazines right on the homepage. So we immediately started to build really good numbers from people who had never seen us before. And for once we had that ability, you know, magazine racks, we could have hundreds of magazines and ours are rather small. Nobody knows. This is where we find them by accident. We'll find them as a look at them. And here we were suddenly in a place right up front, and all these new readers find us. They didn't even know, and then they loved us. They didn't know what they were missing in their lives until we went up. So, but of course, in the early days, there were tons of terrible technological glitches because we worked so early on. The first comments you see on Amazon under the magazine are just terrible comments about, you know, technological problems. And it's sad, underneath many very committed, loyal readers say, but these were all resolved, these were all fixed. But because it's those 2 comments and they've had like 95 people check whether that's a helpful comment or not, they stay up at the top. But, so it was very interesting. There was, you know, a learning curve. It was quite, could be a little rocky there. But it's been really great for us, wonderful for our bottom line, even though Amazon eventually got thousands of magazines. And again, we're back to, you have to know we exist to find us. But it was wonderful. What I was thinking, one thing that didn't work, I think I mentioned before, was, you know, we had grand ideas that we were going to put lots of like art content. And we found that there are certain problems with the ability to read or to download. You know, there's a certain limit of how much content you read. It's become more expensive, provided, but because you get charged by how much it was being, you know, so there were certain things we had to pull back and do more simpler and do a single not to do the effects. But that was fun.
Can I go back a step?
Absolutely.
I wasn't on the panels earlier. I wasn't working in magazines at the time either, but my perception, okay, before the digital ones, we had the online magazines, only online. That was, I don't know if that was, to me the feeling was that 6 years ago, most people were not doing digital editions yet, quite yet. It was online, and that big problem was making money. And it was only until the digital idea of the ebook came about that actually people started making money. I mean, one thing that I think didn't work and probably still doesn't work that well is online advertising. I may be mistaken, but that seems to be the thing that just was a washout. It's just never made enough money to support anything. So, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed like that evolution was starting back there, and that's changed a lot.
I would agree. I wouldn't say that free online fiction doesn't work, but I do think it has it's not been made to work in a vacuum without things like digital subscriptions. I'm a nonprofit. BCS is 501c3 charity. That kind of, by definition, means I have not figured out how to make a profit. I've figured out that because
and it's worth on that too. I mean, there are still webzines that do it mostly for other reasons.
Right.
Although tour, I know that at least one of my writers who is on tour.com said she got a royalty check from the individual ebook, which means that tour must be making some of that money too.
Right.
But I'm sure it's not enough to support the entire site.
I can back that up definitely from my side of the equation. Idemaster is free read. We don't pay an awful lot. We're semi-pro, so it's $40 a story, which used to be more before. 6 years ago that was more. Pay rates have moved, and I feel like a lot of the semi-pro or the literary journal style online magazines that were kind of had presences in 2008, a lot of them folded. People have moved on to other things. Craig's Mixed-Up's gone, although they resurrected recently, and I'm very interested in doing. Virgin Hero's gone. New stuff has popped up, and they're playing with different models, but the advertising was never something we played with. We have had open donation tip jar for years, and I think anyone who's looking at reader contributory models, PDS models basically, has gone to Patreon to mediate that. So I think people are still playing with that, but through a very recognizable platform rather than individually. Donation tip jar doesn't really work unless you are hammering on it every issue, and everyone wants to be hammering on it every issue. That starts to slide the whole presentation of your issue from look, this fiction is so great into sales pitch, and that's a very uncomfortable slope.
or donation pitch, and I feel discomfort about that as well.
It's not business.
Advertising is actually going to save us more money than it used to, but it's never going to amount to cover the cost. I think that's what people are out of subscription companies pay for a number of other
I feel like I'm trying to think back to 2008. That was a very long time ago, and I did get a lot of sleep. But I feel like it was not the Wild West of the digital magazine phase. This wasn't that point in time where everyone was like, but the production costs are practically gone, so we can do anything. But it was still kind of the transition out of it. I think there was a lot of curiosity as to the financial ability of what that means and what you do, and
If not terror.
if not terror,
That reminds me of the thing I was going to mention. I said was that 2009 was just the beginning of respectability from. Yes.
No, that's not true.
No, you were an exception. Science fiction was.
And even on?
Yeah, but a lot of people were like, I remember when we started in 2006, being told by authors, hell no, I'm not going to send you a story because I don't want it online. That's the den of pirates and amateur writers. And that was during science fiction's peak. It's like
Strange Horizons,
yes.
so there was discovery, and we weren't seeing them on boards ballots, with the exception of science fiction. And we weren't seeing them as representing Reader's Best or the Locust List or things like that. And that's 2009 is where I think it started to tip and move back. For a while, anthology sort of took the lead, and online magazines sort of taking it from them. And now it's sort of a balance between all of them.
One of the things that I think gave me, I was on the print, I think that's clear, on the first time around, and I was the lone person on the print panel who was the voice of reason, I think, and justified now looking back on it, because the other print editors were all aghast at the idea of online magazines and very defensive about it too. But I think one of the reasons I was like that was I had been through the previous revolution, which was the desktop stuff that was happening in the 1980s, and that was the Wild West. That really was. Every person above the age of 14 started a magazine, and the people who were 14 were probably better at it than the people who were 24. There were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of desktop magazines, of which the one I still edit now, which was started in 1986, and the predecessor of Doppelganger that I had taken over from someone else that already existed, there were hundreds of them. And I saw what happened to those magazines. Most of them, virtually all of them are gone. There's almost nothing left that looks like those, except for somebody who just like wants to start something as a hobby. The reason I wasn't opposed to and I saw online magazines, the great opportunity was, if I had been the same age in 2009 as I was in 1986, I would have been starting an online magazine. Because to me, that was the new frontier. It was the thing I really probably would have wanted to do. But I was already established, I'm older, I've got a professional job that uses up most of the hours I'm awake. I don't have time to go and learn all this stuff. It doesn't mean that I don't respect it, it just means that I'm good at doing the stuff that I do. And I was absolutely stunned at how negative the reaction was from the other print editors at that panel. I mean, I realized there was resistance because some people like to touch the paper, some people think that being online means it's ephemeral, it'll disappear, all sorts of that. You know, I get it, but I was really surprised at how negative the reaction.
If I could just establish that, I find that, I feel like what you said is sort of the answer to what Leah said about certain authority in online magazines. Because when you said that, I was thinking, my short fiction career is 15 years old right now, which is a terrifying thought. Online markets have always been a viable thing to me, and so I think what you're saying about sort of revolutions in mode and models of thinking about what constitutes publication authority, I think that was very much present, because when I started publishing in like 2002-ish, 2002, yeah, that was always a thing, but that could be intensely generational.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I remember, older writers, this always astounds me how astounding. The older science fiction writers who were supposed to be embraced in the future were last embraced. Not all of them were close. I mean, even just an Omni doing online chats, basically had to go type stuff. Right. I remember Barbara Silverberg could not figure out how to do an online chat. I mean, of course, they're a little criminal than they are.
But there are always wonderful exceptions, like Jack Wood, who can do anything.
Yeah, I mean, eventually blog sort of like email and stuff. But yeah, I mean, that always astounds me, because here the science fiction writers who are imagining the future are terrified of the future either. And that's why I know a lot of them were afraid of it online.
Well, I think it was not, I mean, I remember having someone telling me that was very insulted by the print editor's attitude toward online magazines, and was very irritated. And I said, but I've never said anything like that. I've never been unsupportive. And, you know, I felt that the person was making a real assumption about me and my views, and we've become quite friendly since then, but it was a, you know, the person felt very defensive, and I probably had very good reasons for that, but they wasn't that I felt that way.
I experienced some of that too, with BCS being fantasy. After a certain print fantasy magazine became financially untenable and closed, BCS was blamed, not by name, for its free fiction, perhaps being a major cause of the downfall of a print magazine that needed a lot of subscriptions and ad revenues to keep going. And I, of course, did not at all think that online killed the print star, but that was a reaction from those circles.
So what happened with Benson, of course? They lashed out at, and Mike Resnick's final editorial was lashing out at the other online magazines that were doing it for free. And the fundamental failure on their part was that they had a paywall, and paywalls have proven to fail online.
That's in my list of what didn't work.
Yeah.
Yes. I'll throw out one more on the what didn't work, and then we'll move more into what did, as we've already done. For me, as a niche magazine, secondary world fantasy, that also was my reading preference as a reader. And 6 years ago, a lot of the niche magazines were really drying up. The generalist ones were doing much stronger. Black Gate, of course, was very niche. The Sword and Sorcery. They were also, of course, print, so those things are rapidly together. Realms of Fantasy was more than just secondary world, but definitely niche magazine. And so they really seemed to hit hard times. But as we transition into what did work, one thing I've been very happy to see is a lot more niche magazines emerging now across the board. There's Sword and Sorcery magazines, Fantasy Scroll. There's a new magazine called Grimdark that does only Grimdark fantasy. Galaxy's Edge, of course. And that to me, as a reader, I like knowing when I go to a book or a magazine, I go there because I'm in the mood for that kind of stuff. So I like knowing that that brand name feel is going to be there. So I'm very happy to see that sort of niche feel coming back and being viable.
The thing I pick up on that, and tie it into something I spoke about on the panel 6 years ago, which my big enthusiasm has been the internet as not just digital page. Actually getting at the potential of having a non-static medium and writing to those structures. I was a big proponent of hyperfiction. See, I see Ken nodding because Ken did a hyperfiction piece for us that was brilliant. We actually did a group reading of a couple Readercons ago that was breathtaking. We didn't know if it was going to work, and it worked. But that seems to have really, in terms of niche magazines, the first thing I thought is the poetry magazines. Goblin Fruit. Are you guys online now?
Yes.
Yeah, I found it. Delirium. They're online now. I'm thinking about Lackington's, which does a lot of poetry. And I'm specifically thinking about in Strange Horizons earlier this year, and I hope I'm pronouncing her name right, Bogi's Pouch did a piece that it's literally, there's an applet. It is a poem that scrambles the letters and writes itself with all the same letters into a different poem. And they are both beautiful. Seriously, go find that thing. It's in Strange Horizons sometime later this year. And that is the kind of niche work you only can do in, a non-paper medium. And I feel like that has flourished after, like there was the Great Dial, and some very interesting stuff is coming out now.
One of the things I thought was going to happen with online magazines that didn't happen, or at least every attempt to do it, I thought, failed early on, was I thought that just as people have learned to use media different ways outside of magazines, that they would do the same thing in magazines once they were given the opportunity to do it. I thought, for instance, that online magazines would be a good way to deal with world building because you could have hyperlinks. So like picture Dune with all of those little openings by Princess Erland and all that. What if in one of those chapters you could actually link to the chapter in that book?
That's hyperfiction.
Yeah, right. Those are the things I thought that immediately occurred to me. When people started doing online magazines, I thought, that's great, this is something I can't do in a print magazine. And for a long time it didn't work.
But the thing is, it just hasn't happened in magazines. If anyone is familiar with Twine as a tool, yes, no? Okay, Twine Community or Renting, these are all middleware things that are coming out of the gaming community to write interactive fiction. Twine is basically a free downloadable tool that lets you write those stories as hyperlinks, and there is a great community code source for it to make it do things you have. And people just, they make these like little small originals, or they tip jar or sell them on Steam, but it's moved, that kind of writing has moved into the gaming sphere. Not so much it's not in the magazine space anymore. It never really took in the magazine space. It's just in the same way paranormal romance as a genre exists between SFF and romance. It exists between gaming and fiction writing and gaming it.
Let me throw out another thing that I think online is
I have to disagree about interactive fiction. I really think this is maybe a dinosaur thinking, but I really can't think that it's ever going to work. Usually, I think it's extremely niche. I mean, I've done this stuff where you deal with the links and how I work with fiction, and I probably haven't seen enough. I'd like to read that poem that you talked about. I remember Paul Duran published an interactive story that really worked very well. But mostly I think that's not how the brain is wired, and I don't think that's going to change soon.
Yeah, we
I actually agree with you, and I think it's my linear story focus.
When it works, it's bad, I think it's really.
We were on a panel in Florida. I'm sorry, you keep trying to talk. There was an article in the New York Times about an avalanche, and as you read down the article, there's a skier coming down the page, and as the skier comes down the page, you have sidebars with all this information about this avalanche and where people died and what happened here. And so the article actually changes when you read it. It's a fabulous article, but so it really shows what can be done. But it took an entire team to produce. This article wasn't written by one person.
But it's also non-fiction versus fiction.
Right, but it's amazing use of the media.
I wanted to have a piece of cover art that the artist had done as an animation, and I asked my web guy, is there any way we can do this? And he said that would be a GIF, a movable GIF. It would be like 10 megabytes and take 20 minutes. Actually, if you move on, I wanted to throw out audio. For me, is another thing that online enables. It's of course not unique to that, and online audio fiction, I think, has definitely been a thing that has worked. It of course existed before the escape pod artists, but Neil, I think, was the first, Clarke's World, and BCS the second.
Sci-fi.com had audio.
Oh, cool.
I mean, it was not Tony Daniels, man. It was actually performed. That shit was
Right, radio theater.
Yeah, it was brilliant. Like,
Sure.
Seeing here, whatever the hell it's called. Seeing here.
Right.
Seeing here. It was a time, so I'm trying to say whatever happened. It was fabulous. And I sat in on one of the sessions where the writer was reading. So it's been done. I mean, it wasn't even done in mid-2004.
Right, and the escape pod artists were podcast seeds and still are, of course.
Where did podcast come from versus audio? I mean, why is it called?
The podcast came out of a community where the iPod, exactly.
And casting, because it's you subscribe to it and it loads.
Right.
Yeah, so
As a broadcast. But I think Neil and I were the first ones to pair it, and I don't know what sci fiction did, so if I'm wrong on that, please excuse me, to do regular episodes. I get right. So whereas Neil and I would have regular podcasts with text fiction, because the escape pod artists were all podcasts, and we're doing a great job.
and now they do text.
And exactly, they do text. So to me, that combination, you call it hybrid text or audio, has really been a success story. And I remember the conversation I had with you at a Readercon however many years ago, I think 2008. Wow, audio, because I have an amateur musician background, I could do that. And the real kicker was the audiences that the escape pod artist podcasts were getting were huge compared to text fiction audiences. So if I can do this and get my fiction read by that extra audience, of which there's some overlap, but certainly some new listeners, then that's absolutely worth doing. And I think that has been a huge thing that has worked. Let me throw out some other things that have worked, and then we'll get to our magazines better off in a minute. Not only ebooks, but of course ebook subscriptions. Neil?
The system is effective if you can get into the programs. Most of the magazines now that are coming out are having a great deal of difficulty getting into Amazon's program, which is the one to be. You can get into Barnes & Noble if you happen to find the email address of the one person in the entire company that will deal with you. If you wanted to run a magazine, let me know and I'll tell it to you. Know that it's again, another complicated process. So there's a great deal of simplification that can happen that hasn't happened yet. And I've been talking with a number of developers who are trying to figure out what everyone's done wrong. So this is one of those great opportunities in magazines still. If you have a lot of resources, it's not a problem. But the great growth of magazines in the field in the last 5 to 8 years has been small magazines. And they're kind of hampering.
Absolutely, and that to me fits into the niche thing I was mentioning earlier. A lot of these small new ones, some are generalist, some are niche, and I think that's adding a lot. Another variation on the ebook ebook subscription thing that I do some, but that Lightspeed, for example, does a lot, is the ebook comes out on the first of the month. And you can get all those stories then if you buy, and then on the website they're trickled out during the month. And BCS, I release the ebooks a week before they go live on the website. And this is, of course, to try to get folks to pay for early.
Readercon does that too, I didn't realize. They do the stories as ebook, like, I don't know, a few weeks before they go on sale.
Right.
And then they're online.
Right.
Well, I subscribe to Clarke's book myself, partly because I do like getting it all on my Kindle, being able to read those column when I want to, like on the subway or something, which I couldn't do anywhere easily, if I were going to do it online. I like the convenience of it.
Right.
One reason I subscribe. The other is to support.
And that's sort of how we refer to it, actually. We call it the pay-for-convenience model.
Yes. Which is totally sound and definitely works. I mean, that's why the iTunes store supplanted, old Napster and then places where people were getting MP3s for nothing. That $1 works great. Let me throw out also, as things that did work, you mentioned Patreon. I know Neil has done Kickstarter. Those are certainly revenue-generating things that have worked for some magazines and some people.
I have a question about that. I noticed some magazines do it as a regular fundraiser, like every 2 years or every year. Does that work for them?
Kickstarter as a business model is really lousy.
That's
If you're doing a one-time project, it's beautiful. But if you're trying to use it to boost your subscription base, it's really kind of flawed. Patreon is much more
Can you explain
compatible.
that? I mean, I'm not that familiar.
Okay,
I've heard of it.
Patreon is like Kickstarter's meet subscriptions.
Okay.
Every time you can set up a Patreon campaign two ways. One is it's going to bill people monthly, and the other is it'll bill per creation. So if you're doing a magazine that's monthly, you just drop it in as a monthly and you're done. But people will pledge it. You give them pledge amounts, like it's very much like a Kickstarter campaign in that way. There's rewards, there's goals, there's a target that you're aiming for. So with Clarke's World's Patreon campaign, we have it set up to go monthly. We have a ebook subscription at our subscription price, and we have the only way you can get a print subscription is if you pledge at a certain level, because for a small magazine, print subscriptions are nightmarish. So I minimize them by doing it only through that. And we have goals, and the goals, we just hit one of them recently, and that was when we hit $1,000, we would have an extra story in every issue. And that had value to our subscribers, so that's
$1,000
per issue.
It's exactly like your issue, exactly the money people pledge, whatever. I am always a little leery about the month-to-month maintenance. What is the maintenance like on that in terms of rewards?
You mean how much they
How much
bill us?
back-end work does that give you?
My background is more technical, so I have a system I already have on my site where I just pop a spreadsheet into it and send the issue off to everybody.
Let's skip ahead. I want to do questions in a minute, but let's skip ahead to Are Magazines Any Better Off?